sun almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first before this dictate is out, then we must be bold.
All right. So this speech was given in the early 1960s. We made it. We did it. Huh?
Less than 10 years.
Yeah, he made
said
it.
10 years,
Yes.
did it in 9.
He made it in less, so we got there before 1970, so we did it. Spoiler alert. So most of us have grown up being a people on the moon. Anyone remember learning about this? Or anyone remember, like, anyone in school when this was happening and things like that?
Oh, don't make me.
This morning there was a different balance of things. I'll just keep looking over here. Anyone over here? So this was this stump speech he was making, this push. He was trying to call people to something and call them on this mission. And he was really selling himself, selling who he was, his career, his profession. He's the president of the United States, and he was kind of going all in on this. We are going to the moon. And he didn't have all the details. You know, we got to come up with alloys that haven't been invented yet, and we're going to send this 300-foot rocket into space, and it's going to get to the moon, and it's going to land here safely. But you can see this excitement and this energy. And the people listening, as he made this pitch, kind of had to decide a few things. And not just the people in the audience that day, the listeners, but really the American public. The American public, the lawmakers, and all of those people had to look at President Kennedy's passion to go to the moon and answer a few questions, make some decisions. One, who is this guy? Like, who is President Kennedy that he's going to take us to the moon, right? So one, who is he? Two, are we going to follow this? Are we all going to buy in and think that it's worth going to the moon? Are we going to, challenge Russia and get there first? Is that important to us? And third, if we're going to follow him, what should we expect? So, who is this guy? Am I going to follow? And what should I expect if this becomes my mission? Now, this was a kind of a grand mission for America, to be the first people to get to the moon. So it's kind of this big thing. But implicitly, or whether we realize it or not, we're asking ourselves these three same questions all the time in our regular lives. We can't help it now. We end up trusting in people. We end up choosing to follow people. We end up choosing to join missions. We do this in so many different aspects of your life. When you get married, right, you're like, who is this person? Who am I marrying? You find out after you get married that more and more. But who is this? Am I going to follow this person? Am I going to join this person with my life? And if I do, what should I expect? We do this when we take jobs, and it's scary, right? Like, you're getting a pitch, you're applying for a job, whoever's going to be your boss, or you're getting interviewed, and they're interviewing you, but you're also thinking, like, who is this? What is this company I'm signing up for? Am I going to follow? Am I going to be a part of this? Am I going to join this mission? We do this in politics. Who am I voting for? Am I going to follow them? Am I going to trust them? Am I going to see their vision for what this country should be and be a part of it? We do this in the church life. What church am I joining? What church am I becoming a part of? What's their mission here? What are their goals here? And if I sign up for that, what's it going to look like? And these are scary, daunting things. And sometimes we get these wrong. And it can be really difficult and painful for our life. There's a TV show called The Office. Anybody watch The Office at different times in life? So The Office, there's this kind of bumbling boss who has very little self-awareness named Michael Scott. And his second in command is this gentleman, Dwight Schrute. And Dwight's got his own idiosyncrasies, and he's kind of strange. He's the assistant manager, or the assistant regional manager, or the assistant to the regional manager. And Dwight always follows Mike, always kind of sucks up to Mike, and is always representing him, defending him. And there's this one episode where Michael lets him down, and they're in this garbage dump looking for leads. Like, everything's become a mess. And Dwight loses faith in his boss, and he says this. He says, "I hitched my wagon to a horse with no legs." Someone he'd been following for years, that he believed in for his career, that he was following, thinking, this is the guy who's going to help me, this is the guy who's going to help me get there and there. And he thinks, I hitched my wagon to a horse with no legs. It's kind of funny, but we do that sometimes in life. You might get 3 years into a relationship and think, boy, I really invested in this. but I feel like I've hitched my wagon to a horse with no legs. Or you invest in this job, or you go down this path, or whatever thing you choose to follow or you choose to believe in, and you end up thinking, oh no, what happened here? And there's bitterness, and there's regret, and there's sadness, and there's confusion. I want to go big today as we keep looking at the Gospel of Mark and the kingdom that Jesus is breaking in. I want to talk about what it looks like to follow Jesus. In the story we're going to look at today, we're in Mark 8. It's the middle of Mark 8. And Jesus basically asks his followers these questions. Who am I? Are you going to follow me? And here's what to expect if you're going to follow me. Simply, I want us to follow Jesus. I want us to hitch our wagon to him. I don't want us to hitch our wagon to a horse with no legs. Are we getting it right with our life? Are we getting it right with who this Jesus is? What it would look like to follow him, and what we're signing up for if we follow him. I want us to get this right wherever we're at in faith. If you're someone who's been a Christian for so long, this question is especially for you. Jesus is going to point the question today at people who've been following him for quite some time. And so often in the Christian world, we can have the right answer to this question, but the wrong practice. So it's a question that comes back to us today. And wherever you are in faith, if you're someone who hasn't been a part of church for a while, or has been away from the church, or not sure what you believe, it's still a question to reckon with. Who is this Jesus? Because whenever people have come to see this Jesus, it's impacted them in powerful ways, even other religious groups and communities and things like that. Okay, so we're going to dive into this passage, and this is in Mark 8. We start in verse 27. And I'll read a bit and I'll explain a little. And this is right smack in the middle of the book. Mark wants us to see this section kind of jump off the page and hit us kind of right in the face. So Mark 8:27. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" So he's walking with his friends, and he says, "What are people saying about me?" We've been doing this for a while now. We've been doing this for a couple of years. We've been walking, you've seen the miracles, you see all this stuff going on. It's been exciting, it's been challenging, it's been scary, it's been confusing. What are people saying about me? And they answered him, John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. So they're kind of giving the answers of the categories they already have. Some people think you're like the prophets that we had in the Old Testament. Some people think you're like John the Baptist, and he was doing something similar. He was, declaring your kingdom and calling people to repent and follow. And some people think Elijah, and we believe in this person Elijah from the Old Testament, this great prophet, and he's going to usher in the way of God and things like that. And then he asked them, "But who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am?" I want to go to the next slide. This is one of the commentators of this book. One of the commentaries, this man, Ched Myers. Who do you say I am? This question is the fulcrum upon which the gospel narrative balances. Not only that, upon our answer hangs the character of Christianity in the world. Do we know who it is we are following and what he is about? Do we really know who it is we're following, and do we know what he is about? And that determines what Christianity will be like in our world today. I was a part of a church community, and we were lucky enough to have a class, and we called it like Theology 101 or Intro to the Faith, and somehow we got this guy who was official professor in colleges and seminaries and things like that, and he came to teach this class, and we were going to learn kind of Theology 101. He was going to teach us a bit about Jesus. And the first day of class, he pulled up a stool like this, and he sat down in front of the whole class, and there was maybe 30 people or so. And he simply said this. He said, "Who is Jesus Christ to you?" And there were people in the room who had been Christians for 30, 40 years. And he said, "Who is Jesus Christ to you. And he sat there, and there was some silence. And he broke the silence. He said, I'm comfortable with silence. I'll wait until you guys give me some good answers. And I think those last two words, to you, threw people a little bit. Because it was a group of people, many of them Christians, some of them new believers, some of them kind of on the cusp of faith. And people started kind of mouthing words like Messiah or God's Son or He's God. And they had these answers that were correct answers, but that to you threw them. Like, who is He to me? Like, we can have this right answer. I can say, yes, He's this, or I believe He's officially this. But who is He to you? That's what Jesus is saying to them. Who do you say that I am? Not what are you hearing about me? Not what do you officially say about me, but who are you saying I am? It keeps going. He asked them, but who do you say I am? Peter answered him, you are the Messiah. And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. So Peter gives this answer, the Messiah. And he's right. It's the correct answer. But Jesus' response is a little weird. He doesn't say, yes, you all got it right. This is perfect. Let's move on. He sternly orders them not to tell anyone this. He doesn't just accept Peter's answer, but he says, don't tell anyone this. And we know the answer is correct. The book of Mark says this is a story about Jesus, the Messiah. Now, here's what I think is going on. Peter has the right word, but he doesn't understand what that means. He has the right word. Jesus is the Messiah, but he doesn't understand what that means. So Jesus defines for them who he is in the next verses. Look at verse 31, and we'll put some of these on the screen, or a little bit of this on the screen. So he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said all of this quite openly. So Peter calls him the Messiah. Jesus says, don't say that to anybody. And then Jesus starts talking, and he uses these words to describe himself. He calls himself the Son of Man. He says he's going to suffer, be rejected, be killed, and after 3 days rise again. We want to look at this. This is important. He's telling us who he is here. So he uses this phrase, Son of Man. Jesus sees himself as part of God's bigger story, as this culmination of this fulfillment of the Old Testament scriptures. And in the book of Daniel, anyone read Daniel? Or you've heard the stories in Daniel? Daniel's in the lion den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Some really powerful stories about faith. But in Daniel, there's also these kind of apocalyptic, these visions that Daniel has about God and his reign. And so in the book of Daniel is this phrase, Son of Man. And this book, Daniel, was very, very important to people in the time of Jesus. It was a book about the Israelites being in exile in Babylon. It was a time when the Israelites were suffering. They were being rejected. They were being broken. They were being wounded. And they were crying out and looking to see where God was in all of this. So it's describing this time in like the 500 BC. But the people in Jesus' age and the people right before Jesus' time saw profound truth and power in this book, because since that time, through Jesus' time, the people of Israel had been a conquered nation. They'd been conquered by Babylon, and then Persia, and then the Medes, and then Greece, and then Rome. So this Daniel book had been powerful because it spoke to the Israelite people as they were in exile. It spoke to them as they were in trouble. And Jesus is referencing this idea that he is the Son of Man. And I want us to see this. Now, stick with me on this because we're in Daniel and there's weird stuff going on, but give me your mental strength here. So Daniel has this vision one night. And he has this vision of these 4 beasts. And people who know this book and study it, and even the listeners in the time of Jesus, understood these beasts to represent kind of nations that had conquered and subdued Israel. So there's this first beast, and it's a lion with eagle's wings. Pretty cool. Then there's this second beast, and it's a bear. and then the third beast, and it's a leopard, and then this fourth beast that they don't explain fully, but it's got iron claws and a horn and all of these things. And Daniel sees all of these beasts, and they're meant to represent kind of the nations that have been conquering and overseeing and destroying Israel. So one of them seemed to be Babylon, the kingdom that Daniel was in. And then this picture of after Babylon would come Persia and the Medes, and then after that Greece and maybe Rome. It picks up in verse 9. So after he sees this vision, he then gets this picture of a heavenly court. As I watched, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his throne. So Daniel has this vision. While he's in exile, while he's distraught, he has this vision of God on his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and his hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. This wild imagery. I'd love to see artistic impressions of this. A stream of fire issued and flowed out of his presence, and thousands upon thousands of people stood attending him, and the court sat in judgment. I watched then because of the noise of the arrogant words that the horn was speaking. This is the last beast. And as I watched, the beast was put to death, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season at a time. And as I watched, so he's seeing this scene where these nations are kind of subdued and destroyed by the Ancient of Days, by the Lord, this God of Israel that they worshipped. He's seeing that these nations are conquered, and God is still in charge and on his throne. And as I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a son of man, or one like a human being, one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and he was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all the peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that shall never be destroyed. So Peter said Messiah, but Jesus said the Son of Man. Teach them that, the Son of Man. When they heard that, because they would have known Daniel, they would have known this story, they would have said, you're that guy? You're the one that the Ancient of Days, after he conquers the nations, is going to meet you? That you're going to go to the throne of the Lord, the God we follow, and he's going to give you power, dominion, kinship, and all the nations are going to be kind of controlled and ruled by you? This was stunning, right? You're the Son of Man. You're that guy. You're that guy that the book of Daniel is talking about. Wow. They're probably excited about that, okay? But he keeps going. This Son of Man must suffer and be rejected and be killed. I told you, Jesus sees himself in line with the prophets. He's drawing from this famous passage, Isaiah 53. He sees himself as this suffering servant of the Lord. And here, this is Isaiah 53, and I'll read a few verses. He was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity. And as one from whom others hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him of no account. Surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases, but we accounted him stricken, struck down by God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole, and by his bruises we were healed. He was oppressed and he was afflicted. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him with pain when you make his life an offering for sin. So he says, I'm the Son of Man. I'm this glorious one who's going to have all the glory one day. I'm also the one who's going to suffer and be rejected and be killed. And then after that, I'm going to rise again. So he explains who he is to these people. He says, I'm the Son of Man. I'm that guy. I'm the guy from Daniel. I'm also the suffering one from Isaiah. I'm the Son of Man, but I'm also going to suffer. I'm also going to be rejected. I'm also going to die. And then after 3 days, I'm going to rise again. Who do you say I am? This is who I am. This is who I am. This is who I'm going to be for you. And Peter has a response. He said all of this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. It's a bold move. Peter takes Jesus, the Messiah, the one who's just explained he's the Son of Man, and says, Jesus, come here. Let me explain why you're wrong. All right? So Peter takes Jesus aside, right? Took him aside, and began to rebuke him. So Peter, and to be fair, this is the way you rebuke someone, right? There's a group of you. You think they're wrong. You pull them aside, right? You don't call them out in front of everyone. That's not polite, right? So Peter did that. He said, Jesus, you come here. Let me rebuke you. Look what Jesus does. But turning and looking at all his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Peter does the nice thing and says, I'm just going to talk to Jesus one-on-one. Jesus turns it around and says, "Get behind me, Satan," in front of all the disciples, and just calls them out completely and says, you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Okay, so Peter was right. He's the Messiah. But Peter was wrong in that he didn't understand what the Messiah really was. And this is important because this is what all of us do. And it's important to know this. There's nobody who's more Christian at this time, other than Jesus, than Peter. He has just called him the Messiah. He's just called him the Christ. There's nobody who's more religiously into Jesus on the planet than Peter at this moment. And Jesus calls him Satan. And here's why. Peter calls Jesus the Messiah, but Peter wants to decide what that looks like. Peter wants to determine what that is. Peter's saying to Jesus, Jesus, yes, I trust you. I believe in you. I'll follow you. I've been following you. I'm going to be one of your disciples as long as you are what I get to say you are. Jesus, I love you. I love what you're doing. As long as you keep doing what I think you should be doing. As long as you look the way I think you should look. Then I'll follow you. Then as long as you're the Messiah the way I want you to be the Messiah. But Jesus, I don't like what you're saying right now. I don't like that you're going to be suffering. I don't like that you're going to be rejected. I don't like that you're going to be killed. Because that means if I'm going to follow you, then I might have to suffer. Then I might have to be rejected. Then I might have to be killed. Jesus, I want you to be this way. And Jesus says to Peter, and he says to every one of us, when we try to follow Jesus and tell him who we want him to be on our own terms, he tells us we're wrong. And he says, no, this is who I'm going to be. If you're going to follow me, I want you to know who I am and who I mean to be for you. I am the Son of Man. I am the one who's going to have dominion, power, and authority. But that comes through suffering. It comes through rejection. It comes through the cross. And after that is the resurrection. And he asks all of us, who do you say I am? And I ask us today, and I call us to consider that today. Who do we say he is? And I want us to know this. And he wanted Peter to know this. And Peter ultimately saw this and ultimately came to believe this. Before we get it. Peter didn't get it at this time. Peter doesn't get it a couple chapters later. The rest of the disciples don't get it. When he goes to the cross, nobody gets it. But before any of us get it, he is the suffering one. He is the rejected one. He is the crucified one for us. This is who he has chosen to be for us. Even when we wouldn't have chosen it. Even when we would have said, no, we want you to be this. We want you to look like that. We want you to be this type of Messiah. Jesus says, no, this is who I am, and this is what you need most. You need a suffering servant who will suffer for you, who will be rejected for you, who will die for you, so that by my wounds you can be healed. There's a great hymn called How Deep the Father's Love. And it goes something like this. It goes, behold the man upon the cross, my sin upon his shoulders. I hear among the mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin who put him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. Why should I gain from his love? I cannot give an answer. Why should I gain from his faithfulness? I cannot give an answer. I think when we hear these words from Jesus, we're meant to stop and stop for a moment and say, all right, I'm not going to tell Jesus who he is. I'm going to let him tell me who he is. And he's going to tell us, this is who I am for you. I am the suffering, rejected, crucified one, so that you can gain, so that you can have my reward. Stop trying to give me all the answers. This is who I am to you. Who is Jesus Christ to us? If he is this, then we should follow him. Now, he then makes he keeps going, he keeps talking. After he describes who he is, go back one time. After he says, I'm the Son of Man, I'm the suffering, rejected, killed one, and on the third day I'm going to rise again, right? So he tells them all this. He says, Peter, get behind me. Any path where you decide who I am, that isn't this path, is wrong. It's not of divine things, but you have your human mind and your human kings. So he's talking to Peter one-on-one, then he goes to all 12. The next verse, he just shouts out to the crowds. He called the crowds with his disciples and said to them, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will be ashamed when he comes in glory of his Father with the holy angels. And he said to them, truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see that the kingdom of God has come with power. So after talking to these 12, Jesus just calls out to them. He calls out to the whole crowd. And he says, if anyone wants to follow me, here's what to expect. Here's what to do. Here's what it looks like to follow me. Take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me. If anybody wants to save their life, they have to lose it. And if anyone wants to keep their life, they're going to lose it. So he gives these words in like 3 different ways over the next couple chapters. He says, if anybody wants to save their life, follow me and lose it. If anybody wants to be great, his disciples will want to be the greatest in a couple chapters. He said, if anybody wants to be great, go and become the least. If anybody wants to become the master, go and be the servant. And his path, he goes over and over and over again. Jesus says, come and follow me and go down, descend, let go, deny yourself, let go of what you want the Messiah to be, let go of being the greatest and become the least, let go of life and give up your life for the sake of following me, and you'll gain it and you'll find it. And then he has this final verse where he says, 9:1, it says, truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see that the kingdom of God has come with power. This is a verse that confuses people sometimes, because he says, there's some of you who won't taste death until you see this. And we look at this and think, oh, when Jesus comes in power, we're thinking new heaven, new earth, new creation. When he comes in his glory and things like that. Here's why I think he could say that. There's some of you that won't taste death. And he's talking to the followers, talking to the crowds right there. He could say this because the cross is his glory. He could say this because going to the cross inaugurated the glory. Going to his cross brought the glory. Going to the cross accomplished this great thing that broke the kingdom in and broke this new heaven and new earth and broke this kingdom forth. So he could say to them, some of you are not going to die before you see the kingdom of God because you're going to see the glory of me going to the cross for you. You go to the next slide, Brian. Who is Jesus to you? It's a question we all have to answer. Will we follow him? And what should we expect? If we follow him, we should expect to take up our cross, deny ourselves, and follow him. I want to say just a few simple things about what that looks like, what that means, kind of what's the mission. Jesus tells them who he is. He says, take up your cross and follow me. And at the end of his Gospels, he gives them his mission, right? He says, after he dies and after he's resurrected, he says, you are going to go be my witnesses to Judea, Samaria, and all the earth. He says at the end of Matthew, he says, go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them, baptizing them, and teaching them to obey all things. And that's pretty simple. Jesus' mission was to bring in the kingdom and then have everyone else go out and declare and have others, have his followers go and share and call all people to the kingdom and be his witnesses and make disciples of all of these things. And what Jesus did is, simply put, he multiplied God's kingdom. You have a slide for that? Yeah. Multiplied the kingdom. That became his mission. He was with these followers. He called them out. It's pretty simple. He gathered some followers and said, follow me. And he kept calling other people out and saying, follow me, follow me, follow me. And sometimes they got it and sometimes they didn't get it. And after his death and resurrection, Peter and James and John and the other disciples finally got it. And so Jesus multiplied himself into them. And then he called them to go out and to share the kingdom and to spread the kingdom. And it kind of fits all these parables he's telling, right? Like the parable of the sowers we heard a few weeks back. Like when it caught, it started multiplying 30, 60, 100 times. These people that caught it, followed Jesus, denied themselves, rejected their old way of life, lowered themselves, and that led to this multiplying growth of this kingdom. Jesus told other parables like the kingdom of God's like this mustard seed, and it's small, but then it grows and grows and grows and grows and becomes kind of the greatest tree in the kingdom and things like that. So he sent people on this mission. Now, you might hear this passage and think, all right, I'm supposed to deny myself, take up my cross, and follow him. And I bet sometimes people hear this and think, all right, what grand thing am I going to do to prove or to show Jesus that I'm taking up my cross and following him? Sometimes I think we say that as a smokescreen. Like one day I'm going to do this incredible thing that's denying myself and I'm going to follow Jesus, but I don't see how I can do that in everyday life. Everyone he was talking to was a regular person, everyday regular life, who weren't going on some other, insane thing right away. They were going to start following him right where they were, start denying themselves right where they were, start losing their life to gain it, start becoming the least instead of the greatest, right where they were in their regular stuff of life. And what Jesus did was he multiplied and he invested and gave up his life to invest in a few others and bring them along on his journey to grow his kingdom. So if we're going to deny ourselves and follow Jesus and follow him, here are a few simple things we can do in this humble little community today. Quite simply, it's this. Wherever we're a part of the Christian community, wherever we're serving or following Jesus, find ways to invite other people to become a part of that. That means if we're here gathered on Sunday, find ways to invite one more person to that. Find ways to bring one more person into that. That might be a little scary. That might be a little daunting. It might take some time. It might take some energy. We might have to rearrange our schedule. We might have to do some work to go get somebody or bring them in. We might have to face rejection to invite other people to come and hear about Jesus. All sorts of little inconveniences. That is all about the dying to ourselves. All about the saying, Jesus left all of his comforts to come and give himself for me. If I'm going to follow him and show people who he is, what can I give up to go out and be available to others to bring them in? So that means that if you're serving or following him in this community somewhere, serving with the children or running Friday night digs or wherever you're at, one way you can follow him and multiply his kingdom is to invite one more person into that. The Friday night digs community, you guys are doing a great job. You started this. Keep it going. Keep inviting other people. Make that a multiplying movement. That's what the mission of the church is, to be a multiplying movement of Christians. That's how the church grows. When people take up their cross, deny themselves, stop worrying about their comforts, their needs, their things, and say, how am I going to find a space to go ahead and bring others along and show others the kingdom? There's I'm going to slide this over here a little bit. There's this parable that comes from India. There was this great Indian king, and he loved chess. And what he would do, he thought he was the best chess player in all of India. So whenever there was a visiting dignitary or a wise sage or a foreign king, he'd always invite them to play chess. And he would try to entice them. He really wanted to beat them. He was sure he could beat everyone. He was sure he was the smartest. So he would say, I'll give you, if you beat me in chess, I'll give you whatever you want up to half your kingdom. So this one sage comes, and he says, all right, king, I'll play you. If I win, here's what I want. I want you to give me rice. And here's all I want you to do. I want you to multiply rice on each piece of this chessboard. So that means on the first one, I want you to give me 1, and on the second one, I want you to give me 2, and so on and so forth. That's all I want. So the king says, okay, great. The king loses the game of chess. He's bummed. He hasn't really lost before, so he's distraught and frustrated. But he says, all right, I'm not going to give away half my kingdom. I just have to got to pay this sage out his rice. So he starts doing it. So he goes 1, 2, then he puts 4 down, then he puts 8 down, then he puts, that's exactly 16, he puts 16 down, and this is 32 definitely, I counted it out, I see it, and then 64, and then 128. By the time he gets to the 40th piece, halfway through the board, he's at 2 gazillion, I think. I had it written down somewhere. When it gets to the other side of the board, he gets to 512 gazillion pretty quickly. He can't supply the amount of rice. He has to forfeit the kingdom. When the followers of Jesus multiply themselves, when the followers of Jesus, this is how the kingdom of Jesus grew after his death and resurrection. It was simple followers multiplying themselves in the lives of others. Simple followers calling other people to come and follow along and discipling them. Where 1 disciple of Jesus became 2, and 2 became 4, and 4 became 8. If we did that here, then 15 become 30 in a year, and 30 becomes 60, and 60, 120. When followers of Jesus do that, what happens is the kings and queens of this world have to forfeit their kingdom to Jesus. This is what happens. It becomes a kingdom mess. It's hard to clean up. I did this morning. That's what happens. When followers of Jesus take up their cross, follow him, deny themselves, become servants, become the least, and follow him, and join in his mission to multiply his kingdom. Let's pray. Jesus, help us see who you are. Jesus, keep us from telling you who you are. Help us get it right. Help us get it right, not for the sake that we can enjoy being right, but because without your Spirit we get it wrong. Keep us from the satanic thoughts of thinking you can be the Messiah that we want you to be, or you can be the King that we want you to be. Keep us from rejecting suffering and rejecting the cross. Help us be a people who understand who you really are. God, I thank you for being the Son of Man. I thank you for being the suffering, rejected, crucified one. Help us know you truly that way. Help us trust you as that. Help us know that the way to resurrection in life is the way of the cross. God, I pray for every single one of us here that we would find joy in following you, even amidst pain and trials and tribulations, but that we would embrace those knowing just how good you are. God, help us follow you. Help us multiply your kingdom. by taking up our cross and following you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.